It was one of those quiet Sunday mornings when Emma finally had the house to herself. Mark, her husband, had left early for a work trip, and she was in no hurry to start the day. She wore her soft pajamas, the kind that made her feel cozy but not exactly ready for company. She carried her coffee cup to the window, enjoying the rare stillness. The neighborhood was calm, and for once, she didn't have to rush anywhere. She had planned a slow day, maybe reading, maybe calling her sister, maybe nothing at all. But then came the knock. Firm, unexpected, echoing through the hallway. Emma froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, she thought maybe it was a delivery. But the sound was too purposeful, too sure. Like someone who knew her. Setting down her coffee, she moved toward the door. Her hand hovered on the knob, a strange nervousness creeping in. She wasn't dressed to meet anyone. She wasn't ready for company. Still, curiosity won. She opened the door just enough to peek through on, her breath caught instantly. Standing there was Ryan, Mark's nephew. Emma hadn't seen him in years. The last memory she had of him was at a family gathering when he was still in college tall. A little awkward, polite, but distant. But the man standing on her porch now looked completely different. He carried himself with confidence. His shoulders seemed broader, his presence stronger. His eyes had the kind of calm intensity that made it hard to look away. "Hi," he said, smiling, his voice deeper than she remembered. "Sorry to just show up like this. I thought Uncle Mark would be home." Emma felt the weight of the moment. She was still in her pajamas, hair loosely tied, no makeup. Nothing to prepare her for being face to face with someone who suddenly didn't feel like the boy she used to know. She tugged at her sleeve nervously. "He's not here. He's traveling for work. I didn't expect you." Ryan nodded, brushing his hair back the way he used to when he was younger. But now it looked different, confident, almost deliberate. "Yeah, I probably should have called first. I was passing through and thought I'd stop by. It's been a long time." And the realization made Emma's chest tighten. She opened the door wider, trying to push away the nerves. "Well, don't just stand out there. Come in." He stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the room. The air felt different, heavier somehow, and Emma couldn't quite place why. She shut the door behind him, hoping he didn't notice the way her hands trembled slightly. Ryan looked around, taking in the living room with a hint of nostalgia. "It feels the same," he said quietly, "like nothing has changed." Emma forced a small smile. Some things don't. But she knew better things had changed. He had changed, and she could feel her own world shifting in a way she hadn't prepared for. She moved quickly, more to distract herself than to play hostess. "Do you want some tea? Or coffee?" "Tea would be great," Ryan said. His eyes lingered on her for a second, longer than they should have, and Emma felt the heat rise in her cheeks. In the kitchen, she busied herself with cups and hot water, but her mind kept racing. Why did he have to show up today, of all days, when she was so unguarded? Why now, when she wasn't ready for anything more than silence and coffee? Ryan leaned casually against the doorway, watching her. "It's been years," he said. "I almost didn't recognize you." Emma glanced at him, her hands still moving. "And I almost didn't recognize you either." It wasn't a lie. The boy she remembered had vanished, replaced by someone who seemed older, more self-assured, and strangely magnetic. She handed him the cup, and their fingers brushed briefly. It was nothing, just an accident, but the warmth of that small contact stayed longer than it should have. She quickly pulled her hand back, hiding it against her side. They sat down in the living room, the air thick with unspoken questions. Emma tried to keep her tone casual, asking about his work, his travels, his family. Ryan answered, but every now and then, his gaze would rest on her, steady and thoughtful. And Emma found herself struggling to meet it. It wasn't supposed to feel this way. He was family, at least through marriage. She was supposed to see him the way she always had. But there was something new, something she couldn't ignore. And it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The knock that had started the day had opened more than the door. It had pulled something unexpected into Emma's quiet morning, something that left her unsettled. curious and strangely aware of every heartbeat. She tried to steady her thoughts, reminding herself of who she was, where she was, and what lines could never be crossed. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this morning had already shifted something deep inside her as she sat there across from Ryan, still in her pajamas, still unprepared for any of this. One truth pressed against her chest. She wasn't ready for him, not ready for the way he looked at her, not ready for the way it made her feel, not ready for what this unexpected visit might mean. And yet, no matter how hard she tried to steady herself, she knew the story of this day was only beginning. Emma placed the teacup in Ryan's hands, and for a moment their fingers brushed again. She pulled her hand back quickly, pretending not to notice, but her heart skipped anyway. Ryan smiled faintly, as if he had noticed, though he said nothing. She sat across from him, trying to act casual, trying to calm her nerves, though every sound in the room, the clink of the cup, the tick of the clock, felt louder than usual. So she said, leaning forward, "How's life treating you? I haven't seen you since. Well, since that summer barbecue years ago." Ryan chuckled softly, his eyes lowering for a second as he thought, "That's right. You and Uncle Mark had just bought this house. I was still in college. Everything felt so uncertain back then." He lifted his gaze to her, and his expression softened. "Things are still uncertain sometimes, but I've been figuring it out." Emma nodded, curious. "And what are you figuring out exactly?" He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders relaxed but his eyes sharp, focused on her in a way that made her skin warm. "Work, life, who I am, you know? The usual questions that never have easy answers." It was such an honest reply that Emma's chest tightened. Mark never spoke like that. Her husband was steady, reliable, practical, but he rarely shared what he felt inside. Sitting here listening to Ryan speak so openly, she felt a pull she didn't expect. She tried to hide it behind a smile. "Sounds like you're searching." "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But you seem exactly the same, calm, collected, like you've figured it all out." Emma laughed, though it sounded thinner than she wanted. If only that were true. Everyone has their own storms. Ryan? Their eyes met, and she saw something flicker in his expression, understanding, maybe even recognition. The silence stretched just a little too long, and Emma quickly stood, pretending to tidy the table. She needed space, even just a step away, because the air between them had changed. But Ryan wasn't letting the silence close. "You know, I always admired you," he said softly, his voice reaching her like a whisper, even though he was across the room. "Back then, you had this way of making people feel at ease, like they belonged." Emma froze for a second, her hands still on the tray. Admired. The word carried weight more than she expected. She turned slightly, careful to keep her voice steady. "That's kind of you to say." "It's true," Ryan replied. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't think I ever said it back then. I was just a kid, really, but I noticed." And now he stopped, as if catching himself before saying too much. Emma's pulse raced. She forced a change in the subject, asking about his travels, his work, anything to pull them back into safer territory. He followed her lead, but every now and then, his gaze lingered, his voice softened, and the pull returned. They talked about his time in Seattle, the people he met, the long hours at his new job. Emma listened carefully, but she was also listening to her own heart, which seemed to beat faster each time his eyes caught hers. It wasn't right. She knew it wasn't. He was family, even if not by blood. But feelings didn't always wait for permission. At one point, she reached for the sugar bowl just as he did, and their hands touched again. Neither of them moved at first. The moment stretched, warm and electric, before Emma quickly pulled away. She smiled, covering the tension with a laugh. "Seems we're out of practice sharing space." Ryan's smile was different this time, gentle, knowing. "Or maybe we just notice more now." Emma looked away, her throat tight. She didn't want to ask what he meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Instead, she busied herself with the cups, her mind spinning. She couldn't let this go on, not like this. But the more she tried to stop it, the more it seemed to grow. The light from the window shifted, filling the room with golden afternoon sun. Ryan leaned back, his voice calm again. It's strange. I expected to see Uncle Mark to just have a quick visit. I didn't expect. This, Emma forced herself to look at him. This, he repeated, motioning gently between them, talking like this, feeling like no time has passed. His words hung in the air, bold but not reckless, as though he wanted her to decide how far they would go. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her heart was too loud, her thoughts too tangled. Instead, she sipped her tea and stared at the window, pretending to watch the world outside. But every part of her neuron was watching her, waiting, wondering. The afternoon light softened, streaming golden through the curtains, and Emma felt the room changing with it. Hours had slipped by without her noticing. She had listened to Ryan more than she had spoken, drawn into his words in a way she hadn't expected. He wasn't the boy she remembered. He spoke with honesty, with depth, with a kind of searching that mirrored something inside her she rarely admitted. Ryan leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely, his voice low. When I left for college, I thought I knew everything. But the truth is, I was just running. From the pressure, from myself, from everything. Emma studied him quietly. There was no arrogance in his tone, only truth. She hadn't realized how much she missed hearing words spoken without shields. Mark, her husband, was reliable, steady, and strong, but his words rarely carried vulnerability. Listening to Ryan now felt like opening a window in a room that had been shut too long. Running doesn't always mean weakness, Emma said softly. Sometimes it's just searching for air. Ryan looked at her with surprise, then nodded. That's exactly it. And you've always had a way of saying things that make sense of what I feel. Emma's chest tightened. She should have brushed it off, should have reminded him that she was married, that she was his uncle's wife. But instead she let the words sink into her, warming places inside her heart that had gone untouched for years. He told her stories of late nights working, of friends who drifted in and out, of the loneliness that came even when surrounded by people. His honesty disarmed her. She found herself leaning closer, drawn to the rawness of his voice. You make it sound like you've lived 10 lives already, Emma said with a half smile. Maybe I have, Ryan replied. Then his gaze lingered on her, steady, unflinching. And yet, sitting here now, feels more real than most of them. Emma's breath caught. She looked away quickly, her fingers twisting in her lap. She could feel the pull between them growing, and it frightened her because she didn't know if she wanted to fight it. The clock ticked in the background, each second reminding her of the world outside, of the life she belonged to, of the man she had promised herself to. But still, she stayed in the moment, listening as Ryan's voice softened. You know what I remember most? He asked suddenly. Emma glanced at him, hesitant. What? The summer's here. Uncle Mark was always busy with work. But you were the one who noticed me. You asked how I was doing. You made me feel like I mattered. You don't realize how rare that is when you're young? His words hit her deeper than she expected. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. Ryan, that was just kindness. Anyone would have done the same. No, he said firmly, his eyes holding hers. Not anyone. It was you. Emma couldn't breathe for a moment. She turned her gaze to the window, pretending to watch the fading light. But inside her chest, her heart pounded with a rhythm she couldn't control. His words weren't casual. They carried weight, a memory, a meaning. She tried to change the subject, asking about his plans, his future, anything to steer the moment back into safe waters. But Ryan didn't let it slip so easily. I thought about those summers more than once, he admitted. Whenever I felt lost, I'd remember this house. You, the way you made everything seem calmer, easier. Emma stood suddenly, moving toward the shelves as if she needed to adjust something. She couldn't sit still under the intensity of his words. "That was a long time ago. You were just a boy then." "And I'm not now," Ryan said quietly. The words hung in the air, bold and undeniable. Emma's hand froze on the bookshelf. She didn't turn around, afraid of what he might see on her face. She wanted to say something, to correct him, to remind him of boundaries. But the words stuck in her throat. The silence between them grew heavier, filled with longing she didn't want to admit. She pressed her hand against the wood of the shelf, steadying herself before finally speaking. "Ryan, you don't know what you're saying?" "I do," he answered softly. Emma turned then, slowly, her eyes meeting his. He wasn't reckless, wasn't smirking or joking. His expression was serious, filled with something she had tried so hard not to see. The room felt too small, the air too charged. She crossed her arms, hugging herself as if it could protect her from the storm gathering inside. "You should be careful with your words. I've been careful all my life," he said, his voice steady. "Maybe too careful." Her chest ached. She wanted to end the conversation, to walk away, to put distance between them before it went any further. But instead, she stood rooted in place, her heart fighting her reason. The sun dipped lower, painting the walls in amber light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan's voice broke the silence. "You deserve more than silence, Emma. You deserve someone who sees you." Her breath trembled. She shook, her head quickly, desperate to stop the ground from shifting beneath her feet. "Ryan, please don't." But the damage was already done. The truth was out, and it clung to the air between them. Impossible to ignore, Emma moved back to the couch and sat, but she didn't look at him. She stared at the untouched tea, now cold, wishing she could rewind the day to the quiet morning when everything had been simple. Ryan didn't push further. He sat in silence, his gaze soft, waiting. But Emma felt every unspoken word pressing against her. The living room, once filled with small talk and laughter, was now heavy with everything they hadn't dared to say before. And as the last streaks of sunlight faded, Emma knew her heart had wandered into dangerous territory. She wasn't ready for what he had stirred inside her. She wasn't ready for the longing, the ache, the unspoken bond that had awakened after years of silence. But she also knew something she couldn't deny anymore, whatever this was. It was real, and it wasn't going away. The evening shadows stretched across the living room, and Emma realized how late it had become. The warmth of the afternoon had slipped into cool silence, leaving her with a heavy heart. She stood and gathered the empty cups, her hands moving just to keep from trembling. She needed to end this day, to put some distance between herself and the emotions pressing too close. Ryan rose with her, his voice low. "I should go. I didn't mean to take so much of your time." Emma shook her head quickly. "No, it's fine. You're family. You're always welcome here." She tried to make the words sound firm, steady, but even she could hear the break in her tone. They walked toward the front door together, the silence between them louder than any conversation they had shared. Emma could feel the weight of his presence beside her, the closeness that felt both comforting and dangerous. At the doorway, she reached for the handle, but hesitated. She wasn't ready to face the emptiness that would follow once he left. Ryan looked at her, his eyes soft, searching. "Thank you for the tea. And for listening. I didn't realize how much I needed this until I was here." Emma forced a small smile. We all need someone to listen sometimes. His gaze lingered on her face, steady and unshaken. "I meant it when I said you make things feel like home. You always have." Her chest tightened, the words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. She looked down, her hand still on the doorknob, but she didn't turn it. For a moment, the world felt frozen. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you shouldn't say things like that." "But it's the truth," he said simply, "and I think you feel it too." Her heart pounded. She wanted to deny it, to stop him, to remind him of boundaries and promises. But instead, she closed her eyes, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. She couldn't say yes. She couldn't say no. She was trapped between loyalty and longing, between the life she had chosen and the pull she couldn't explain. The silence stretched. She opened her eyes and finally turned the knob, letting the cool evening air brush across her face. Ryan stepped onto the porch slowly, as if he too felt the weight of goodbye pressing against him. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice softer than she meant. Ryan nodded, but his eyes said everything he didn't speak. "You too." For a heartbeat, they stood there, suspended in something fragile and dangerous. Then, with a quiet nod, Ryan turned and walked down the steps. His figure grew smaller as he moved toward his car, the fading light wrapping him in shadows. Emma closed the door slowly, her back pressing against it as soon as it clicked shut. She stood there in the quiet, her chest heaving, her thoughts tangled in a storm she didn't know how to escape. The house felt empty, yet his presence lingered in every corner. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. She told herself it was just a moment, just a visit, just words spoken in passing. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't that simple. Something had shifted. Something she couldn't undo. Emma moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see his car pull away. She watched the taillights disappear into the night, leaving her alone with the weight of everything unsaid. The quiet house, once her comfort, now felt like a cage. The air seemed too still, the silence too heavy. She sank into the couch, her mind replaying every look, every word, every moment of the afternoon. She had crossed no line, spoken no confession. But her heart told a different story. She thought of Mark, steady and dependable, far away on his business trip. He had given her a life of security, of calm routine. But Ryan had awakened something else, something raw, unguarded, alive. Emma buried her face in her hands, torn between guilt and longing. She had done nothing wrong, she reminded herself, nothing. And yet, she couldn't shake the truth that she had felt more seen in a single afternoon than she had in years. The hours passed slowly. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, a steady reminder of time slipping forward whether she was ready or not. By the time the night deepened, Emma still hadn't moved from the couch. Her heart refused to settle, her mind refused to quiet. She thought of the way Ryan had looked at her, steady and unafraid. She thought of the words he hadn't said, the ones that lingered just beyond the edge of silence. And she knew this was not the end. The knock on the door that morning had opened something in her life that couldn't be closed, so easily. The night pressed in around her, and Emma whispered into the emptiness, as if speaking it aloud could help her believe it. It was just a visit, nothing more. But the echo of her own words felt hollow, because deep in her heart she knew the truth. That knock had changed her, and no matter how hard she tried to hide from it, the memory of Ryan's eyes, his voice, his presence would stay with her long after the night faded.